7 of Europe's most powerful nations just issued a joint statement defending Greenland against American threats. But here's what nobody's really telling the public. This was not just a diplomatic rebuke. This was Europe drawing a line that could fracture the entire transatlantic alliance. And when the dust settles, America will have lost an economic war that it didn't even know it was fighting. I'm Elle, I have a PhD in computer science and I work in finance where reading the numbers behind geopolitical posturing is literally part of my job. And what I'm seeing in the public data right now is a pattern that should terrify anyone who understands how economic leverage actually works. Trump thinks that he is winning because he's threatening military force, but Europe just played a financial chess move that Trump doesn't even see on the board. Let me start with the economic realities that frame this entire conflict. The European Union's GDP is estimated at $19.99 trillion in 2025. The United States GDP is about $30.5 trillion. On paper, America is bigger. That's what Trump sees, and that's probably why he thinks economic threats will work. But here's what the official data actually reveals. The EU has total banking assets of more than $38 trillion, with France accounting for 26%, Germany 18%, and Italy 8%. Global assets under management in the EU is more than 12 trillion as well. When financial professionals analyze leverage, they don't just look at GDP, they look at coordinated capital deployment capacity. And 7 European nations, France, Germany, UK, Italy, Spain, Poland, Denmark, just signal that they're willing to coordinate that capital against American interest. Now let's talk about the specific threat Trump made. Trump threatened to impose very high tariffs on Denmark if it resists attempt to make Greenland a US territory, and a 2024 study estimated Denmark's GDP would decline by 3% if the United States targeted Danish goods like Novo Nordisk Ozempic. We've got another video on that, check it out if you're curious. 3%, that's Trump's leverage over Denmark. Denmark's exports to the US account for between 3 and 13% of their total exports in 2024. And Denmark reports a surplus in trade with the US. Here's where Trump's calculation breaks down completely. Denmark doesn't need to absorb that 3% hit alone. Germany, France, and Italy combined account for approximately 51.9% of the EU's total GDP. If those 3 economies, which just signed that statement defending Greenland, by the way, coordinate to absorb Denmark's potential losses through trade redistribution, the 3% hit to Denmark becomes a 0.2% rounding error distributed across the EU's 2nd, 3rd, and 4th largest economies. Trump is threatening Denmark with a cost Europe can absorb without flinching at all. That's not leverage, that's more like bluff, and Europe just called it. It does pay to have alliances, doesn't it? Now, let me show the financial mechanism where Trump's entire strategy collapses, because this is where it actually gets devastating. Trump's stated justification for threatening Greenland is rare earth elements. Fine. The public reports show Greenland could possess 42 million metric tons of rare earth oxides, which would make it the 2nd largest reserve globally. According to one Greenland official, the island possesses 39 of the 50 minerals that the United States has classified as critical to national security and economic stability. That sounds compelling until professionals analyze the actual supply chain. Here's what the data reveals. China controls nearly 90% of global rare earth refining capacity in 2025 and around 90% of the world's refined rare earth supply. China produces over 300 tons of magnets annually. Now compare that to American capacity. MP Materials is expected to produce only 1,000 metric tons of neodymium iron boron magnets. I hope that I pronounced that well enough, maybe a chemist can correct me, by 2025, representing less than 1% of the 138,000 metric tons, which China produced as early as 2018. In 2024, the US had only one operational refining facility in Texas that produced 1.3 thousand tons of neodymium-praseodymium metal alloy. We essentially need to spot the difference between assets and capabilities. Greenland has assets, raw minerals inside the earth itself, but building the refining and processing parts of the supply chain are estimated to take 10 to 15 more years. The average time horizon for the development of new mines in the US is about 29 years, the world's 2nd longest. The average time to permit and license smelting and refining projects in the US is about 7 to 10 years project. Here's the financial reality Trump refuses to acknowledge. Even if America sees Greenland tomorrow magically like that, Neither Greenland nor Ukraine currently mine their rare earth deposits. The Kvanefjeld project in Greenland remains on hold due to Greenland's 2021 ban on uranium mining. Ukraine will take years to develop mines and refineries, with the average rare earth element facility requiring 18 years to become operational. So Trump would fracture NATO, destroy transatlantic economic relationships, and violate international law to acquire raw materials that America can't process without Chinese infrastructure for at least a decade. This is not strategy, this is economic illiteracy dressed up as national security. We need to think more critically than this. And here's the mechanism Europe just activated. Even with Greenland's rare earths, new mines are dependent on long-term offtake agreements with Chinese industrial groups, since rare earth elements processing capacity and industrial groups remain concentrated in China. If Europe coordinates with China, and that joint statement defending territorial integrity creates diplomatic capital with Beijing, they can simply lock America out of Chinese processing capacity entirely. Trump would control the mine, technically, but not be able to use the minerals. Europe would maintain access to Chinese processing through diplomatic channels America just burned. That's not winning, in my opinion. That's losing with a few extra steps. And let me be very direct about what Trump just triggered with the Greenland threat. The EU is the United States' largest trading partner alongside China. Transatlantic trade in goods and services is worth trillions annually. EU investments in foreign countries total 17 trillion euros, while foreign investments made in the Union total 14.46 trillion euros in 2023. This is by far the highest foreign and domestic investments in the world. When 7 European nations include a joint statement explicitly invoking Article 2.4 of the UN Charter, which prohibits the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, they're not just defending Denmark, they're establishing a legal and diplomatic framework for coordinated economic response. Here's what that looks like in practice. First, Europe can redirect trade flows. Nordic foreign trade shows Europe, excluding Nordic countries, accounts for 55% of imports and 56% of exports. If European nations coordinate to replace American imports with intra-European trade or trade with China, American firms lose market access worth hundreds of billions annually. Second, Europe controls financial infrastructure. The euro is the second largest reserve currency and the second most traded currency in the world after the United States dollar. Paris hosts Euronext, the largest stock exchange in the EU by market cap, with over 1 trillion GDP and Europe's strongest economic hub. If European financial institutions coordinate capital restrictions on American firms in response to international law violations, American companies face a liquidity crisis in their second largest market. This is serious. Third, and this is the mechanism most analysts miss, Europe can weaponize regulatory compliance. American tech companies, pharmaceutical firms, and financial institutions depend on European market access. If the EU coordinates new regulatory requirements or compliance costs specifically targeting American firms in response to territorial aggression, those companies face a choice: lobby Washington to back down or lose European revenue streams. Denmark could face 3% GDP decline from US tariffs, sure, but if Europe coordinates, America faces potential exclusion from a $19.99 trillion economy with $38 trillion in banking assets. The asymmetry is stark here, and here's the pattern Trump fundamentally misunderstands, in my opinion. The world is getting louder, algorithms fight for your attention, politicians sell you easy answers, the media rewards outrage over truth. My book Awake teaches you how to think clearly through all of it. Before you buy, read the first chapter completely free. Links below. If it resonates, the full book is there with a 10% subscriber discount. Anyway, let's get back to the video. NATO's import dependency on China's rare earth elements is nearly 100%. America threatening a NATO ally over rare earth access pushes Europe towards closer coordination with China, not less. Trump is creating exactly the China-Europe axis that American foreign policy spent 75 years trying to prevent. The economic war is not necessarily about whether Denmark can shoulder 3% GDP loss. It's about whether America can function without European financial, regulatory, and trade cooperation. And 7 European nations just said that they're willing to test that question. So let me give a very specific prediction based on the financial patterns visible in public data. Over the next 6 to 12 months, Europe will quietly implement 3 mechanisms, in my opinion. First, they will accelerate rare earth partnerships with China. China and Malaysia are already in early talks to build a rare earth processing facility in Malaysia, with Malaysian sovereignty wealth fund Khazanah National potentially partnering with a Chinese state-owned firm AG Metal Miner. Expect European capital to flow into similar joint ventures, creating processing capacity outside American influence. Second, I think that they will establish alternative security frameworks. If America can threaten NATO allies with military force, NATO's collective defense guarantee is meaningless. Poland's Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, already warned that no one will take seriously a weak and divided Europe, neither enemy nor ally. European nations will quietly build defense cooperation mechanisms that don't rely on American protection, which means American defense contractors lose European contracts worth tens of billions annually. Third, they will coordinate on trade policy, not through explicit anti-American trade deals, but through regulatory harmonization that makes European-Chinese trade easier while making American-European trade more expensive through compliance costs. It's economically efficient protectionism that avoids obvious retaliation. I also think that there is a very high probability that Europe starts partnering with Canada much more aggressively. Here's my specific timeline prediction. In Q1 2026, that's where we are right now, European nations will announce joint rare earth processing investments with Asian partners. They will probably frame it as supply chain diversification, but the subtext is going to be reducing dependency on America's threatened territorial acquisitions. For Q2 to Q3 2026, if Trump continues Greenland threats, I would expect European regulatory agencies to announce enhanced scrutiny of American tech firms operating in Europe. This won't necessarily be framed as retaliation. It will be positioned as protecting European sovereignty in critical infrastructure, but American companies will face billions in new compliance costs. And by year-end, Q4 2026, European nations will have signed at least 3 new defense cooperation agreements that explicitly don't include American participation. Let's see if I'm right in these predictions, by the way, so do subscribe and we're going to check them out as we go along. They will also claim it's complementary to NATO, but defense industry analysts will probably recognize it as the beginning of European strategic autonomy. By 2027, I think that America will find itself dealing with a Europe that cooperates when convenient, but no longer views American leadership as reliable. The Transatlantic alliance won't formally end, in my opinion, but it will just become transactional. Every request for European cooperation will come with a price tag. And here's the financial mechanism that makes this permanent, in my opinion. China will retain its dominance of the rare earth mineral supply chain in the near to medium term, despite efforts to develop rare earth minerals elsewhere. Even further off are mines and processing facilities in regions coveted by US President Trump, such as Greenland and Ukraine, with the average rare earth element facility requiring 18 years to become operational. Trump, I think, will have spent a decade alienating Europe to secure resources he can't really process, while Europe will have spent the decade building alternative supply chains with China. By the time American processing capacity comes online in 2035, 2040, the geopolitical landscape will have changed completely. America might own Greenland's rocks, Europe will own the relationships that make those rocks valuable, China will own the processing infrastructure that transforms rocks into technology, and Trump will probably still claim victory because he got the territory. That's not winning an economic war. This is a world that doesn't feel good for any of us. America would be losing an economic war so completely that the victor doesn't even bother to announce their victory. They just quietly restructure global trade flows while America celebrates controlling an ice sheet. The seven-nation statement defending Greenland was not about Denmark. It was about Europe announcing that they're done treating American threats as credible. When France, Germany, and the UK, with combined financial assets exceeding $20 trillion, tell you that they will not stop defending principles of sovereignty, they are not making a moral argument. It's not an Instagram post. They're making a financial commitment as well. And Trump just called that bluff with a hand that can't really beat a pair of twos. Here's my final prediction. Within 24 months, American business leaders will be publicly calling for de-escalation with Europe because their quarterly earnings reports will show the cost of fractured transatlantic relations. By then, the geopolitical damage will already be done. Europe is playing a 20-year financial game. Trump is playing a 20-day news cycle game. And when you work in finance, you really learn that time horizons determine outcomes ultimately. The economic war is already kind of over. America just doesn't know that it lost yet. Drop your thoughts below. Do Europeans have the political will to actually follow through on this economic separation, or will they fold when American pressure increases? Because based on the financial mechanisms they just activated, I don't really think that they're bluffing this time. And if this analysis helped clarify what's really happening behind the diplomatic language, do consider subscribing, because this story is about to get much more expensive for everyone involved. Check out this video that I've linked here as a natural next step for a deeper dive. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.